Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm standing in for Dr. Jim Robbins here at IWP, the Institute of World Politics, and we have a very special guest today with us, Ambassador David Miller, who has had a storied career in the U.S. government and in the private sector, and is also my boss, as I'm his special advisor at the Diplomatic Studies Foundation, which is a wonderful organization I'm hoping that Ambassador Miller will talk to us about today on the formation of DSF and its mission and some of the projects that DSF is working on. But I want to thank IWP for hosting us today, and I want to thank Ambassador Miller for taking the time to come from across the country to sit with us and talk with us today. Ambassador Miller, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm okay. You're okay?
I guess I'm okay.
Yeah. First of all, I'm honored to be here. I'm exceptionally taken with the mission of IWP. The country badly needs better professional training for diplomats and intelligence officers and so on. There's a myth that when an American student finishes a master's degree from Harvard in Oriental Studies that they're then ready to be a State Department officer. And the answer is no. They've got Oriental Studies down cold, but they may not have a clue what a professional diplomat does. And so we get secretaries complaining that their officers in the field care more about ideology than about implementing national strategy. And we have to somehow or other get the point across that if you're primarily concerned about world hunger, go to work for people working on world hunger. If you want to be a professional diplomat, that's another skill. So that's why I'm exceptionally pleased to be here. I'll try to say something useful.
Thank you, sir. And I couldn't agree with you more on your point. I want to talk a little bit about your career, because when you make that point, it comes with a lot of experience and in the field and here in Washington. So my understanding is you started your career out of university serving in Vietnam, where you volunteered to go for the U.S. government, and then you also have spent 2 tours in Africa as a U.S. ambassador, time at the Department of Justice and the National Security Council, and other different senior positions in the U.S. government. So you've been working on foreign policy and national security pretty much your whole life, and I understand too in the private sector you've also touched on some of that with some major U.S. corporations. Can you talk a little bit about your career and what inspired you to go to Vietnam and do what you did?
Yeah. I thought about 2 approaches to my career. One is intellectual and one is emotional. The emotional one comes with your mother. And anybody that doesn't get that has missed out on what life's all about. Mom decided when I was young that public service was going to be a good thing. And I never looked back, and she never looked back. I used to go to sleep with National Geographic maps that were on the walls of my room with, wallpaper paste. So it was hard not to do what I did. The Vietnam thing specifically, it's not, when I finished law school, I was skeptical enough about Vietnam. It was not going wildly well. But my country was at war, and so I thought I should pitch in, and went looking for how to do that, and found an old thesis advisor and a few of the MIT, Harvard great and grand people who needed somebody who wasn't great and grand, who would be happy to walk around the countryside and say what's going on. And so that's how Vietnam started. Obviously, if you're there for a year, you do a lot of things. But the 2 things that were most relevant to what I did came from a microeconomic background, and that is the Hamlet evaluation system. I hope many of you know about that, but essentially Secretary McNamara brought basically the Harvard Business School, if you can't measure, you can't manage, and so on and so forth, which is perfectly reasonable if you're running a large factory. It didn't work too well in Vietnam. But the HES, the Hamlet Evaluation System, essentially got down to the district level, and we were trying to evaluate whether the U.S. Army was succeeding and our ARVN allies. And the general observation from that work is that the uniformed services are not perfect intelligence. That's not a perfect intelligence structure. And it's not that uniformed services people lie, but as data moves up through the armed forces structure, it warps. My favorite district, Batri district, down in the Mekong Delta, was subject of some of the interesting warping. One of the questions, in essence, was how much of the road network do you control? Thus, how much of the transportation you control? Now, the problem in Batri was we controlled all the roads and nothing was moving on them. But the question wasn't what's moving on them. The question was, what percentage did you control? So I went to Major Jones and I said, sir, this is a little inaccurate. Yeah, but they're asking for what percentage of the roads do we control? So I set off in those first 6 months with a wonderful Chinese-speaking partner, and we did a ton of micro work. For example, if you want to know who's controlling what, go to a Chinese rice mill owner, because they finance crops. No Chinese voluntarily loses money. So you know if they're putting money out that far, they're confident that that's how far we control. So that was a lot of the HES work. And then TET happened, and I spent the balance of my time there trying to figure out what happened during TET. I loved helping. I came home and told a group of senior Americans, because of the White House Fellows thing, that we were going to lose the war, which shocked many people then, pre-TET.
Which year? Yeah, which year was that? 67?
That was before TET. It would have been early in 68. TET was like February 68, something. So in particular, Jim Allen of Booz Allen Hamilton was active in the White House Fellow selection process. So I'd flown home, and Mr. Allen says, well, it must be really great, you know, it's exciting. How's it going? And I said, we're going to lose. Well, see, Mr. Allen thought that that was sort of a shock. But Vietnam was a lifetime in 12 months in terms of my outlook on data collection inside the government, the challenges of being honest, the ability of the U.S. military to succeed. If you're old enough, you'll remember Ed Lansdale from the Philippines, who said, I'll tell you why we won in the Philippines, because the real army went to Korea. And I was left to help the Filipinos win, so I helped them win. We didn't win, they won.
So it seems to me from that experience, you had a great exposure, to really like ground truth diplomacy.
Yes.
Speaking truth to power.
Yes.
The importance of foreign language.
Yes.
in accomplishing a mission, being in a foreign country.
Yeah.
And really learning what was going on. And you took that experience and then you continued with your government service. What happened next? I mean, is that when you went into
what happened
Department of
next?
Justice, or?
Yeah. I got picked as a White House Fellow. And there was only one lawyer in the whole group. So I got sent to the Justice Department. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I've never wanted to be a lawyer. It's a terrible cover. You have to work hard all the time. So I got sent to the Justice Department last 6 months under Lyndon Johnson. So the AG was Ramsey Clark, and we went from Ramsey Clark to John Mitchell, which was an ideologically exciting leap. I liked Mr. Mitchell. He was in the wrong job. So I worked for Mr. Mitchell for a year and a half, and then went over to run the White House Fellows Commission to work with John Dean, which is a story I've told many times. John thought that the president needed a safe house. And this is in a book, so I'm comfortable with this. So John says to me, "We'd like you to set up a safe house for the president." And I said, "There are people in this town that set up safe houses for a living. Why would you want me to do that?" "Well, the president doesn't want anybody to know about it." And that kept me from going to prison. I walked out at the far end of the EOB on the first floor into the hallway, and I said, "I got to quit."
Wow.
Yeah, these people are I guess weird is the new word. They weren't weird. They were in over their heads, trying to pretend that they knew what they were doing. And you can't do that. You've had a career that proves that you just have to know what you're doing.
And so you
I quit.
You quit? God bless. And then
Yeah, I had 2 2/3 kids.
2 2/3 kids.
Yeah.
Mashallah.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
I'm sure your wife was.
She was thrilled. We spent 90 days in a Holiday Inn at Exit 5 of the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
And then what happened? Then
What happened?
private sector or?
Yeah. I was in Pittsburgh because of Westinghouse.
Okay.
And this is an important story, I think, for people that are here. A very bright, wonderful group executive at Westinghouse, 38 years old, had been a tackle at Fordham when Vince was the line coach. He was a tough kid. And so he brought me out there for about 90 days to look at a range of public sector investments that Westinghouse had made. And I finished looking at them for 90 days, and I was absolutely convinced that they had not a clue what they were doing, which was a judgment I still stick with today. And I went in to see Mr. Murren, and I said, "Tommy, I'm sorry, but your guys are never going to succeed, and so this may not work." And he said, "No, you're hired." And I said, "Say what?" To which he said, "I know they don't know what they're doing, David. Your job is to figure out what can be done." which is one of those funny, odd stories of just telling people the truth. And there are occasions when it works. And then there are occasions when it's really difficult. But it's a good lifelong habit.
Right. Thank you for saying that, sir.
Yeah, it is.
How did we meet? We met during a running of the Peace Games. I was asked to reach out to you by a mentor of mine, a great American who was my boss at one point earlier in my career and someone I always looked up to. And he told me, contact Ambassador Miller, be aware that he's a force of nature and he's doing something very important. He needs some help. Given your background, and can you talk a little bit about the Peace Games and Diplomatic Studies Foundation and how you created that? What inspired you and the team that built DSF, what the mission is, and what the Peace Games are, which I think are probably I'd love the audience to hear about.
Now, if this were a hearing, I'd say, which of those questions would you like answered first?
Anyone you want. It's not a hearing. It's
okay. The Peace Game is the end product of Pickering, Crocker, Beers, Miller,
Ambassador Thomas Pickering.
Ambassador Thomas Pickering, Acting Secretary of DHS Randy Beers, Assistant Secretary Chet Crocker, and me.
So you roll with a pretty tough posse. Ambassador Pickering was my ambassador at one point in my career, amazing diplomat, amazing American. So you have some good friends.
I do. I have wonderful friends. The whole DSF thing came about because that gaggle of leftover guys kept saying, we're not doing as well internationally as we should. And it isn't that the strategy is necessarily bad, but the execution has been really poor. And I don't want to get into any details because I'm not a big policy guy. But we've suffered from mission creep in places to an astounding degree. We have finished phase 4 with a notably obscene general and transitioned immediately to a civilian that thought he reported directly to the president. Nobody reports directly to the president. I mean, there are a handful of folks, really. So our group, that was an informal group, just getting together and working, did a paper on the National Security Council, trying to figure out why the NSC hadn't worked better. And so we did a good report on that. The Atlantic Council published it. And I testified before the HVAC on that report. And then Ed Royce, who was the chairman at that time, said, gosh, if you could do the NSC, you could do the State Department. Not true. So we did a report in the State Department and ran that by Deputy Secretary John Sullivan, who's a wonderful man. And John said, why not concentrate on education? He said, nobody can be opposed to education. The department needs education. It's not that our people aren't smart, it's that we need to do more with them. I have frequently ended testimony by saying I've never seen an organization work so hard to hire people and do so little with them after they're hired.
Interesting.
I mean, it's just odd. Generally in the private sector, we'll hire anybody off the street because we need somebody to do something, and then you spend a lot of time training them.
Right.
But that gets to the peace game. How do you improve the performance of the department? Essentially, the peace game is like a war game, and the peace game works on the assumption that a U.S. country team will work better if they train at least once before deployment. Now, it's important, though, to caveat that by saying the military will bring the whole unit in that's going downrange, and they will move as a unit. This is not that. This is individual officers from key components of a typical country team, and they are faced with the beauties of working in the Sahel, or in this case, a hypothetical country on the Bight of Benin, which blows that cover, but whatever. And the theory is exceptionally simple, and that is total battle space awareness. Our military practices forever on total battle space awareness and overlapping fires and integrated assets and so on and so forth. What does the civilian community do before they go downrange? And the answer is essentially nothing.
Right.
That's silly.
So I told you when I first met you, and when I experienced this, I don't think anybody in my 34-year career had ever had the idea to train for peace, to train to actually avoid having to resolve a conflict or a disagreement with another country by peaceful means. I mean, I think we all talk about it, But
Yeah.
actual, the training piece, and you're right, the military, other parts of the government train all the time.
Bingo.
But what I found super impressive was the way that you were bringing everybody together in a more benign environment where people can make mistakes and learn.
Yes.
Instead of being on the front line, which in my career I was in a lot of places on the front line where
Yeah.
little mistakes can be very costly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of our young diplomats get thrown into a meat grinder and pressure cooker, and they don't have they didn't have the training or the opportunity to do what you have been doing with the Peace Games. So it's I mean, have you ever heard of anybody else providing this kind of training? I've never heard of
No.
it. It's amazing.
No, I mean, there's a week's worth of conversation here. But one of the fascinating things is that we train in stovepipes, and we then deploy coming out of the stovepipes, and then we expect them to play as a team in the Super Bowl when Niger, today we left Niger. This is the day we finally turn over the base. That's serious.
Right.
There was a country team there that might have been able to do better in getting along with that government. But the point of it is that the country team has huge overlapping pieces. And until you've run a country team, you don't see that.
Right.
But USIS, back when we had libraries on the street, was a tremendous source of information. They knew more than anybody. The kids are coming through the library. They're looking at this issue and that issue. DEA, FBI, CIA, there's a stack of talent. All the State Department bureaus, all the military assistants, NGOs, other countries, when are you going to play a game and figure out how they fit?
Right.
There's absolutely nothing to the idea. It is the simplest damn idea you've ever heard of.
Again, to your point, I mean, what I saw over and over again is a lot of talent.
Yeah.
And a lot of education, but not a lot of coordination, not a lot of synergy sometimes, because those teams had no exposure to each other. You know, I agree with you on the stovepiping piece.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're lucky, people just naturally get along, or maybe you've served with someone somewhere else, and so you have a built-in relationship, or you have a great ambassador who is really good at, like, engendering this kind of collaborative environment. But, you know, it's probably too late to wait for the ambassador to do that in the field, because the ambassador's busy, and as is everybody else on the, you know, senior part of the country team. So what you're doing with DSF is really, I think, very special. How do you sustain, like, the program? I mean, where's your support coming from?
I drink.
That's why I like being with you, sir.
I drink.
Yes. Water.
Yeah.
Water. Maybe we should do an advertisement. You guys have anything where any kind of soft drink where?
It looks like gin. But you sustain the effort intellectually by the excitement of doing it. It's a hugely exciting exercise, and so I think that's fun. It keeps me up at night, wakes me up in the morning, gets me here talking to you. Meeting you just almost justifies a half a game. How many games?
And a lot of drinking.
A lot of drinking.
And a lot of drinking.
And then
Water. Drinking water. Staying hydrated.
And then, though, there's another piece of what I'm trying to do, and that is to get the U.S. private sector back involved more in a cooperative way with the USG overseas. And so we're completely paid for by high net worth individuals. And I recruit people that not only have money, but have the intellectual competence to say, one, for example, is an operating partner in a very large private equity firm. So he thinks a lot about management and management success and how you evaluate and so on and so forth. So we can learn from a lot of people who can also write a check. And then most importantly, at some point, we will be able to take the American economy and attack the Sahel with not the third group,
Right.
but with somebody who's technically and financially competent.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts of the world where I've served where if it's that, you know, what was it during the Clinton first thing? It's the economy stupid. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's very hard to imagine countries moving towards democracy or a stable market economy when people aren't eating. I mean, it's survival.
It can't be done.
And
That's
the
the
U.S.
trick.
has so much talent and experience, and it's great too that you're trying to bring in and encourage that
Yeah.
collaboration between the private sector and the government, foreign affairs community,
Yeah.
which is greatly needed.
Yes.
So, can I ask you another question? In the car over here, you mentioned to me something which I thought was amazing, and it is, everyone knows my hero is Ronald Reagan. And can you tell us a story about how Ronald Reagan, leadership example you gave me about
With the kids?
Yeah, before you went overseas for one of your tours.
Yeah. I greatly enjoyed working. I was downrange 6 years when he was president. And he's the most amazing guy. The story that I told Glenn was we were doing the 10 minutes of wasting a president's time by walking my kids and my wife in to say hi to the president. So we get through the door and there's the president, and my kids are like 8 and 10 and 12 or whatever. And the first thing the president says is, "How do you like going to school in Africa?" And with that, folks, began a great dialogue.
With your children.
Yeah, my 3 little kids they just sort of melted. "Oh, sir, I mean, we were in school in Lagos for 4 years, and now we're going to be in Dar es Salaam." You can't replace the magic of a successful leader. There are people that can do that by instinct. It oozes from them. And then there was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon hardly ever walked into a room without his arms folded across his chest. You'd watch, if you were in the cabinet room and the door is opening from his office space, he sort of walks in like that. You want to say, "Sir, it's okay. You're the president. We're just here to help." Ronald Reagan, like all great politicians, just had that ability to reach out, and my kids were just sitting there chatting away with him. And it makes your job, it makes my job so much easier when your kids don't say, for the 85th time, "Are we going to move again, Dad?"
Right.
"Really?
Right.
Why don't we pick a different continent?"
I don't know, sometimes, a lot of young people want to serve in the government. They want to serve in the foreign affairs community, for the CIA, for the State Department, you can maybe DIA, FBI. And I always have to warn them that there's a huge sacrifice that's required by the families. My wife and sons, they put up with so much during my career. Now, we had a great experience, and we were just together the other day laughing about some of those experiences. And my sons feel blessed to have lived in some of the countries they did, but there were moments when it was really tough to know that the President of the United States appreciates that and takes the time to talk with your children. I can imagine how that meant a long way for you and your wife and raising the kids.
Yeah.
So,
but that's a profound point about what's happening here, and that is, if you're married and you're not on a team committed to the same objectives, you're going to hate it. It's tough enough.
Amen.
When you both love the country.
Amen. Yes. I agree with you. I saw that too in my career. Some people are just 50% of the equation is not enough.
No.
With the lifestyle.
It's hard enough to worry about what you're trying to do out there without saying, "How could I have done this to my wife or my kids or whatever?"
And we jumped a step here. We talked about DSF and the Peace Games, but you were an ambassador in 2 countries. Yeah, I mean, 6 years overseas in Africa.
4 years with Westinghouse.
And then 4 years in Westinghouse overseas.
Yeah.
Wow.
Before I was running a gigantic construction telecoms project in Nigeria. If you can do that, being an ambassador is a slam dunk.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
Building stuff in Nigeria should not happen to anybody but a first-degree murder, guilty player who managed not to be executed.
Oh, wow. 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you became an ambassador.
Yeah.
And what were your 2 ambassadorships? Tanzania?
Tanzania, which was really fun, Julius Nyerere, and Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, which was absolutely awful.
And what were your takeaways as an ambassador when you talk about the country team, the different players you had? Like, what were the lessons that you learned in your first ambassadorship, coming from the private sector, being overseas for 4 years, and then going to the government?
Well, I started off by pulling a private sector trick on my Tanzanian country team. So at our first country team meeting in Dar, I said, well, we need a strategic plan for Tanzania, our interest in Tanzania. And they said, well, that's what you're supposed to write, sir. And I said, no, that's what you're going to write. And there was this sort of confused look, and I said, I want to know what you think your assignment is here. And when we put them all together, and we see if you have the resources to execute, we then have a country plan. I can't write your problems, or whatever. You got to tell me what you're trying to do and whether you have the assets to do it. So that was the first whiff of somebody coming in from the private sector and saying, my job is to make you succeed. If you succeed, we all succeed. And so we wrote it all up, sent it back to Assistant Secretary Crocker and said, this is it, boss. This is what we're going to do. We've got the resources to do it. We'll keep you posted. Which is no different than running a business unit around Westinghouse or building. I built a lot of stuff in the Niger River Delta.
What was your favorite project?
What was my favorite project? Overseas?
Yeah.
I'm going to throw in one that I haven't mentioned before, but for 2 years, Westinghouse had me going from one country to another, drafting strategic plans for them, for Westinghouse. At that point, we had like 144 business units, all of them running around the world and having a grand old time. So you go to sell a nuclear power plant to the Shah, actually 6. And he's upset because he has a Westinghouse refrigerator that didn't work right. That is a true story. But you go from the low voltage breakers to large rotating apparatus, turbines and so on, smaller thermal plants, nuclear plants, so on and so on. And that was the most fun. I greatly enjoy how the private sector works. And so I got to do 8. The first person that told me the Shah was not going to make it was the head of the Westinghouse business operations there.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Was that person Iranian, or were they?
No, U.S. national.
Okay.
But we built the radar that Iran was using to look over Iraq, the ARSA 120 or whatever. They had F-4s. We built the radar and the F-4s and so on. And it got tight enough that we just did all our Iran meetings in Athens. But from an intellectual standpoint, that was the most interesting thing in the private sector and helped me get a better grip on what the private sector can and cannot do.
During those experiences, what was the level of cooperation, lash up between, let's say, the embassies where you were and Westinghouse, or was there a lot of cooperation, or
typically not?
Not, yeah.
In Nigeria, it was outstanding because we had an ambassador named Don Esom, who had been the Assistant Secretary of State under Henry Kissinger, and Henry fired him in the best tradition of Henry, and sent him to Lagos. So I had a really good time with Don Esom. And that was a good model of cooperation. I had 50 pickup trucks. I had construction sites essentially in many places in Nigeria. I had more assets in the field by far than the U.S. government. So if they needed to pitch up someplace in the evening and get food, to find a rack and sleep, and so I had a good time there. And I think if we could try to close the gap between our public and private assets, we could do so much more. I can tell you that if you're looking to put down rebar, the best people doing rebar are Igbos. Now, Igbos, as you know, are from Enugu. Now, that was the Civil War. But I had a lot of Igbos working up north around Maiduguri. And when they left the construction site, I knew things were bad. I knew things were bad probably before anybody inside the embassy.
Right.
And it's just...
You're out there.
Yeah, it's just because you're out there.
You're
looking
embedded.
at stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it getting done?
Yeah. Fascinating. And we jump back to Diplomatic Studies Foundation. You talked about this informal group of
Leftover
heavyweights in the
okay.
no, like the veterans of the foreign affairs community getting together informally, talking. I didn't ask you the year, but identifying that there seems to be a problem with our foreign policy, that it's not as successful as it could be. And it's interesting you say it's maybe not the policy, but maybe the execution, and how do you help improve the execution? Well, how do you? Where are we today with our foreign policy? What do you think?
Well,
what has to happen?
As I've tried to say, and it's not false modesty, I am not a foreign policy expert. I'm not Richard Haas or whatever. But I spend a lot of time thinking about the ability to execute. So in thinking about that today, I think that there are a number of trend lines that continue that are challenging. One is that the National Security Council continues to grow. Its effective area of responsibility is bigger than what appears on paper, and its structure is not wildly well suited for that. Among other things that people don't focus on is when the president leaves, the records go with him. So, I come in to do hostages and terrorism and drugs and thugs and so on and so forth, and we were sterile,
So you're starting from scratch.
Which is why I kept Randy Beers, because we were in a bunch of, this is many years ago, we're in the middle of a bunch of ops, obviously trying to get hostages. So George Herbert Walker Bush had said, everybody goes. They're all wonderful people, but GHWB and Brent wanted their own team. So Randy starts talking to me about what we're doing. And I walked across West Exec and I looked at Brent and I said, Randy Beers isn't going anywhere, which got one of the first Scowcroft looks of, really, David? do you want to tell me why? And of course, the reason is that you can't just tear up folks in the middle of these ops. So one of the first things, I think, is to recognize that the NSC is growing and not fight it and sort of say, it's happening. How do we make it happen better? And there's a lot of housekeeping on how to make it work better. The other thing is that, sadly, same straight line extrapolation. The State Department continues to suffer. And as evidenced by the fact that we didn't have a state authorization bill for something close to 2 decades. Nobody seems to care if you have ambassadors at post or not. Niger had no ambassador for 20 months before it blew up. Nigeria finally got an ambassador about 6 months ago.
Right.
Absolutely the most critical country in the west coast of Africa. Oh, why would you have an ambassador? That's got to stop. That's just stupid.
So having served as an ambassador, why is that so important? Can you articulate why is it so important to have an ambassador? I mean, people can argue, well, you have senior State Department people there, you have other people
Bingo,
from different
that's it.
agencies.
You just said it. You have senior State Department people there. Okay, the station chief doesn't necessarily have to spend as much time listening to a senior State Department person, nor does the legat, nor does the DEA attaché, nor does the USAID director. I mean, an ambassador gets a remarkable letter from the president. It's very close to a ship command. And when that person isn't there with Senate confirmation, the ability to call the station chief in and say, I can send you home tonight. Really? And the answer is, yeah, really. That's different. Now, Tom Pickering, I am told by Tom, used to start his meetings when he would arrive at a new post by saying, this is a letter that I have from the president. This is my authority. I want all of you to understand that. I'm the kind of ambassador that exercises that authority. Then it becomes friendly. Then it becomes, how do I resolve DEA, the FBI, and the CIA? The CIA sees a target. The FBI sees a target. The FBI wants to send them back to an AUSA. The agency wants to leave them in place and use the corruption. And you, the ambassador, need to say, we're all going to put this on a team. And so that's the importance. And then if you're doing it right, there's a head of government that feels disrespected if you don't have a real ambassador. They know the difference.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And my career, when I was in situations where we were with a chargé for extended periods, it was problematic, to say the least. And I have to say this now, maybe some of my former ambassadors are listening. I was very blessed to have a lot of great ambassadors that I worked with, including Ambassador Pickering, who was an inspiration, his drive and his ability to represent the United States and remind people that we are the United States.
Yes.
We are a great country. And the pride in our country, in a very difficult environment, in a country where probably the most challenging foreign policy position in the world, maybe, where we served together. I was under his command as a junior officer. So let's go back to DSF too. What about the support aspect? I think there's some people that, in addition to the heavyweights, there are some people that were key in making DSF successful, bringing the Peace Games online.
Oh, sure.
Can we give them a shout out?
Yeah, their institutions and their people. Or let me get it down to specifics. There's a person, Catherine Elliott, Katie Elliott, made the Peace Game real. Katie organized and ran the games through the 5th game, while at the same time graduating at the top of her class in National Security Studies at Georgetown.
Wow.
She's a star. You will hear more about her, I suspect, I hope, shortly. Institutional support came from a small component of the University of Maryland called ICONS. ICONS is a simulation game building organization. And they had built games for decades for the uniformed services. And we dropped the idea of how about doing a game for peace? And I think they got us excited about it as we did, and did a terrific job of doing the nuts and bolts for a game. So you've got 130 injects or whatever. You've got 2 days of computer time, whatever. You've got the Washington Oversight Group. You've got the country team. And ICONS integrated all that. And then we needed a place to play We played up at College Station for the first three. College Station is sort of a pain in the neck to get to. USIP, you can roll downhill out of the C Street entrance and you'll get to USIP.
And a beautiful building.
Yes, and
Yeah,
a beautiful
amazing
building.
facility.
And they're intellectually competent. So they have a facility, and they have Dr. Joseph Sani, to get quite direct, knows a great deal about Africa. He's from Cameroon. And so they've become absolutely critical as we institutionalize this.
And, you also rely on a lot of volunteers, correct? I mean, formers.
Almost everybody.
Who give their time, State Department, AID,
Yeah.
Other agencies, organizations,
Yes.
who take their time and come in and work as mentors and role players as part of the game. Can we talk about them a little bit? Can give them a shout out?
Sure. I think the 50,000-foot view is, it's amazing that so many people, you can look at the CIA officers, both analysts and operators, they're all active duty. We're not paying anybody. They're just coming in. And then uniformed services, military, same thing. Colonel Nate Prussian, Colonel Chris Molino, who's now on the Afghan Commission, two players from the Tier 1 unit at Fort Liberty. USAID Jim Beaver is head of their Retired Employees Association. That was a telephone call coming up the staircase here because Jim Beaver is trying to get us in to see the assistant administrator. You get so many people who've just said, this is wonderful. Don't pay me. Nate, I'd like to quote Colonel Prussian. Nate was an officer in our unit at Fort Liberty, and then became commanding officer of the 3rd SF Group, which is Africa, and then ran the schoolhouse at Fort Liberty, and then quit, which bothered the Army because Nate would have been a brigadier in the SF community. And I've quoted Nate a lot on this, and it's a quote that disturbs some people. But Nate said, "I cannot kill people fast enough to solve your social problems." That says a lot.
Right.
And there are more SF-type uniformed services people coming out of the woodwork to say, it doesn't work to prepare the 82nd Airborne to fight in Central Europe. And then if we're going to fight someplace else, it becomes the 8.2 Airborne. And then if it's small, it becomes the .82 Airborne. But it doesn't change culture. It doesn't change approach to people. And if you keep thinking that seizing dirt means you've won and not influencing people, you've lost. This is General Giap versus General Westmoreland, which didn't come out great for us.
Right.
It was tough on the Vietnamese people, too.
Right.
So the volunteer web just keeps growing. People, I got a call the other day from a young lady who's a senior logistician, to which you would say, why? And it's interesting. All the goods, all the giveaways, all the money, all the whatever flows through a logistics chain. Oh, now there's another obvious observation. How do you handle these?
Right.
With what skill do you give them to people?
Right. Yeah.
She's cool. She's going to go a long way, too.
A lot of amazing people.
Yeah.
Led by you, sir. So I think we have to wrap it up in a second. But really, I'm very thankful that I got to meet you and be part of this. And I always tell people if we had more Americans like Ambassador Miller, we'd be sitting
Thank you.
in a much better spot, I think, internationally and as a country. But before we go, I just want to ask if you have any messages for our listeners, especially the younger listeners who are aspiring to careers in government or thinking about what to do with their lives.
Yeah.
What's your message for them?
You couldn't live a better life. Period. That's the friendships you make in this work when you get to be 80 are people that you really love. That's a great gift in life. It's hard to see that when you're 25. It's clear as a bell when you're 75. The other thing, I know Brent would want me to pass this on. Brent always said to every child that listened, read history. Said that to my grandson. And as Brent would say, it's hard to know where to go if you don't know where you've been.
Amen.
And so it's hard to read too much history. The other one for American kids is get out of the United States. Get into other countries. Learn that there are different people. They're not bad people. They're just not like you, which may be just fine. A stunning assertion. And so I always urge kids, somehow or other, what influenced me, the American Field Service sends me to Takamatsu, Japan. Yeah, that was away from Cleveland, Ohio. And it's good for you. And the last one is to remember your reputation goes with you forever in this community. It's small. It's a small community at the top. And speed of movement is governed by trust. If you don't have any trust, you're in terrible trouble. If you trust each other, you can do anything.
That's a great point. All great points.
That's it. And I am honored to be here with you, sir. Since
you,
you
sir.
can't discuss your background as much as I can blabber about mine, someday you should do more writing. I know you're doing some, but there's a lot to be learned from you, so I have threatened to become the interviewer at some point.
We will do that. We will agree with IWP. We'll reverse the tables on me, and I'll try and answer your
Good.
questions. But I can't tell stories about being in the Oval Office with Ronald Reagan. Unfortunately, I can only dream of that. But I've been with some other presidents, and a lot of the points you made, too, about leadership are spot on. And it means so much to anyone when they're, like a leader like that, takes the time to talk to their children or show some interest in their personal lives. I'm sure the president was busy, but, and you're not the first person that's told me great stories like that about Ronald Reagan, so the type of leadership that we need today in this country, I believe. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thoughtful, kind, ideologically relatively certain, but kind about it.
With a lot of good jokes.
He loved jokes.
He loved jokes.
That's probably how I got in.
Anyway, thank you again,
That's it,
Ambassador
man.
Miller, and I want to wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you, IWP, to the school and all the faculty and students and support staff, and we'll see you for the next interview when the ambassador grills me.
That will be fun.